Hey guys, tonight we travel back to one of history's scariest questions. How did the strongest empire the world had ever seen just disappear? For more than 1,000 years, Rome was known as the Eternal City, the beating heart of the whole world. Its armies marched across 3 continents. Its roads reached the edges of the known world, and its power seemed as lasting as the mountains themselves. But empires, no matter how strong, are built by people. And people, as we'll find out tonight, can make mistakes so huge they are still remembered hundreds of years later. So before you get comfy, please take a second to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I do here. And hey, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. It's always cool to see who's joining us from all over the world. Now, turn down the lights, maybe switch on a fan for that quiet humming sound, and let's start tonight's journey together. Because what we're going to talk about isn't just the fall of an empire. It's the story of how one choice, made with the very best intentions, turned into the deadly mistake that ended Rome forever. Picture this. The year is 753 BC. On 7 hills next to the muddy Tiber River, a group of shepherds and farmers are about to change the world forever. They don't know it yet, of course. They're too busy staying alive, chasing away raiders, and arguing about whose goats are whose. But something is growing in these rough little villages. You can call it ambition, you can call it destiny, or you can call it the simple human feeling that says, there has to be more than this. These early people, the first Romans, are building something that will change the world forever, an unbreakable belief that they are meant to be great. The old story says Rome was started by Romulus and Remus, twin brothers raised by a wolf. It's a beautiful tale full of gods and miracles. But the real truth was probably messier and very human. Rome wasn't born from a fairy tale. It was born from need, from the hard daily fight to survive in a world where the strong ate the weak. What made these early Romans special wasn't that they were stronger or had more people. It was their way of thinking. While other tribes fought just for land or gold, the Romans fought for something much bigger, the dream of building something that would last forever, something that would live longer than any one person. They built a whole way of life around discipline, giving up things for others, and loving their city almost like a religion. Roman kids learned that being famous didn't matter if it didn't help Rome. Roman soldiers promised to be loyal not just to their bosses, but to the city of Rome itself forever. Even the poorest Roman citizens walked tall because they belonged to something bigger than themselves. This wasn't just loving your country, it was deeper, almost magical. Romans truly believed with all their hearts that the gods had picked them to rule the world, not to grab it and leave, but to make it better, to bring order where there was chaos, to turn wild lands into safe, happy parts of one huge empire. And for hundreds of years, it looked like they were right. Roman armies marched north into Gaul, south into Africa, east into Asia. Everywhere they went, they didn't just take over, they built roads that are still there today. Giant water pipes that brought clean water to cities hundreds of miles away. Beautiful public squares, theaters, and baths that turned rough villages into real cities. Being Roman wasn't only about being strong in battle. It was about changing things for the better. When Rome took over a new place, it didn't just ask for money. It gave people citizenship, fair laws, protection, and the chance to be part of something amazing. The Roman Empire wasn't just a bunch of lands that lost a war. It was a big idea turned into real life, the idea that people could make a world that was fair, safe, and rich for everyone, bigger than anyone had ever dreamed. By the 1st century AD, that dream had come true. Roman laws ruled from Britain all the way to the Middle East. Roman roads carried shoppers and letters across 3 continents. The famous Roman peace, the Pax Romana, had stopped hundreds of years of fighting and brought calm to millions of people who had never known peace before. But here's the hard part about huge dreams, especially dreams as big as Rome's. They need constant care. They need people to keep giving things up, staying watchful and working together. The moment people stop feeling like one big team serving the city forever, the dream starts to fade. By the 200s AD, cracks were already showing. The empire had grown so huge it was hard to hold together. The armies that used to be Rome's greatest power were now spread across thousands of miles of borders, fighting never-ending wars against enemies that kept popping up like weeds. The money that once overflowed with riches from all over the world was now running out fast because soldiers had to be paid, walls had to be built, and the giant government needed tons of cash. But the Romans in the 200s still believed. They still carried that old feeling deep inside that Rome would last forever, that hard times were only short, and that nothing could ever end their city. They couldn't imagine a world without Rome, because to them, Rome wasn't just a city or even an empire. Rome was the whole idea of civilization. They were about to learn that even the biggest dreams can turn into nightmares. And the nightmare was already growing in the mind of a man who thought he was saving Rome, when really he was about to make the one choice that would destroy it forever. To understand how Rome fell, we first have to remember what Rome was supposed to be. For almost 500 years, Rome wasn't an empire ruled by one person. It was a republic, a brand new idea that power should belong to the people and the leaders they chose. The Roman Republic started with a promise. Never again would Romans let one man be a king and boss everyone around. In 509 BC, they kicked out their last king, Tarquin the Proud, and promised forever that no single person would ever have total power over Rome again. They made a smart system with lots of checks so no one could take over. Two leaders called consuls shared the top job and could stop each other. The Senate gave wise advice and kept things steady. Groups of everyday citizens got to vote and have their say. For hundreds of years, this system worked great. It turned Roman energy into huge successes for everyone. When Romans won new lands, they did it for the Republic, not for one famous leader. The treasures from war made the whole country richer, not just one general. Growing Roman power meant growing Roman laws, Roman citizenship, and Roman ways of life. But success can be dangerous, as we'll see many times in this story. The richer and stronger Rome got, the more some people wanted everything for themselves. Why share power when you could have it all? Why serve the country when the country could serve you? The first big cracks showed up in the 100s BC. Roman generals coming home from winning wars in Greece and Asia brought back not just gold and slaves, but new ideas about being treated like kings and worshipped like gods. They had tasted total power and they liked it. Two brothers, Tiberius and Gaius Gracchus, tried to fix things by giving land to poor people who had none. They were killed for trying, and their bodies were thrown in the Tiber River. The message was clear. The old fair ways were dying, and fighting was becoming the new way to get things done in Rome. Then came Marius and Sulla, two generals who changed the army from everyday citizens who fought when needed into full-time paid soldiers who were loyal only to the general who paid them. They started a terrible civil war, each saying they were saving Rome while really hurting it more. But it was Julius Caesar who gave the final blow. He was smart, charming, and totally ruthless. Caesar saw that the Republic was already broken. The only question left was who would be the one boss. In 49 BC, he crossed the Rubicon River with his army and marched on Rome itself. "The die is cast," he said. With those words, the Roman Republic took its last breath. People killed Caesar on March 15, 44 BC, hoping to bring back the Republic. Instead, it started another 13 years of civil wars. When everything finally calmed down, Caesar's adopted son, Octavian, was the only one left in charge. But Octavian was smarter than his adopted dad. He knew Romans still loved the old republic ideas of sharing power. So he didn't call himself king. He took the simple name Augustus, meaning the respected one, and said he was just the first citizen bringing the republic back. It was a beautiful lie, and Romans loved it because they wanted to believe it. Augustus kept the old government names but took away their real power. The Senate still met, but only to agree with him. Elections still happened, but only his friends could win. People still gathered, but only to cheer for him, and for a long time it worked perfectly. Augustus brought peace after years of war. He fixed the army, the government, and taxes. He built roads, water pipes, and huge monuments that showed the world how great Rome was. Under him, Rome started its golden age, the Pax Romana that lasted 200 years. But the price of this peace was the death of the free spirit that had made Rome great at the beginning. Romans stopped being citizens who helped run their country. They became people who just waited for the emperor to take care of everything. The old Roman ideas of duty, personal responsibility, and giving things up for the good of everyone started to disappear. Even worse, the new emperor system created one giant problem that bothered Rome for the next 400 years. Who would be the next emperor? In a republic, leaders were chosen by voting. In a kingdom, the job went to family, but the Roman Empire was pretending to be both, so there was no clear, fair way to pick the next boss. Some emperors adopted good men to take over. Some trusted the army to pick, some hoped their own sons would be good enough. But over and over, when an emperor died, armies fought each other for the job. By the 200s AD, it was a total mess. Between the years 235 and 284, Rome had 26 different emperors. Most were killed, some ruled only a few weeks before soldiers murdered them. The empire was tearing itself apart from the inside. This was the broken world that Diocletian took over in 284. The country had no money left. The army was sad and tired. Enemies were breaking through the borders. Prices were going crazy because money wasn't worth anything anymore. Disease had killed huge numbers of people. The idea that Rome could never lose was totally gone. Diocletian was a tough soldier who had started poor and worked his way up because he was really good. He looked at all the trouble and made a choice that seemed super smart at the time. If the empire was too big for one man to run, why not split it up? Why not have more than one emperor to share the work? It made sense, it was practical, it fixed the problems right away, and it was the start of the end for Rome. Before we talk about Diocletian's big choice, we need to understand what Rome had turned into by the 200s. It wasn't the strong, hungry republic that had taken over the Mediterranean with hard work and teamwork. It was something totally different, an empire drunk on winning, stuffed with money, and slowly forgetting the things that had made it great. The change happened little by little. Each new group of Romans lived a little better than the last. Each emperor tried to build bigger and fancier things than the one before. Every victory brought more gold, more fancy stuff, more ways to show the world Rome was the best. By the 100s AD, Rome was the biggest shopping and fun city the world had ever seen. The city of Rome itself had over 1 million people, bigger than London would be for another 1,500 years. But most of these people weren't working hard like in the old days. Huge numbers were jobless and lived on free food handouts and giant public shows. Bread and circuses, one writer complained, and he meant it as a bad thing. The Roman people, who used to be proud citizen soldiers, had turned into a crowd that only cared about free bread and exciting games. They had traded their duty for comfort. The emperors were happy to keep it that way. A full and entertained crowd stays quiet. Why let people take part in government and maybe cause trouble when you can just give them food and fun? The huge Colosseum, finished in the year 80 AD, could hold 50,000 people to watch gladiator fights that lasted days. The Circus Maximus racetrack could fit 250,000 people for chariot races. These weren't just games. They were ways to show off power and keep people happy. An emperor who gave the best shows was loved, even if he was bad at running the country. People cheered for blood while the empire slowly fell apart inside. The worst rot was in the army, once Rome's proudest part. The old legions that took over Gaul and Britain were made of citizens who fought because Rome was their home and their pride. But by the 200s, almost no regular Romans wanted to join the army. Why risk dying far away when you could stay safe in the city living on free stuff? So the emperors started hiring people from outside the empire. German tribes, Sarmatian horse riders, Gothic fighters, as long as they could swing a sword and follow orders. These hired groups were called foederati. They were often great fighters, but they weren't Romans. They didn't love Roman ways. They had no reason to care if Rome won or lost forever. This started a bad circle. The more Rome used outside fighters, the less Roman the army became. The less Roman the army became, the more it acted like just another hired gang that happened to wear Roman uniforms. And hired gangs, as history shows again and again, turn against their bosses when the money stops or someone else pays more. The money side of the empire was just as shaky. Rome got rich by winning wars, but by the 100s there were no more rich places left to conquer. The empire had grown as far as it could go, blocked by deserts, forests, and oceans that cost more to cross than they were worth. Without new treasures coming in, Rome had to live on what it already had. But the Roman money system was built to take riches from faraway places and send them to the center. It wasn't built to make new money by inventing things or working smarter. Roman tools and machines stopped getting better. Roman farming stayed old-fashioned. Roman factories couldn't make things cheaper than places like India and China. The result was a slow money disaster that went on for hundreds of years. To pay the army, the government workers, and all the free food and shows, emperors made coins with less real silver and more cheap metal. Prices shot up like crazy. Buying and selling got harder. The middle class, normal, hardworking families got squeezed until they almost disappeared. By the 200s, there were just two kinds of people: a tiny group of super-rich nobles and a huge crowd of super-poor people who depended on the government. The old middle class of farmers, craftsmen, and shop owners was mostly gone, replaced by slaves and outside settlers who didn't care about keeping Rome going. This wasn't just a money problem, it was a heart problem. The Romans of the 200s had forgotten what made their great-great-grandparents strong. They didn't want to give things up for the good of everyone anymore. They only cared about themselves. The old Roman religion that said, "Serve the gods and the city," was losing people to new religions and ideas that promised personal happiness instead of duty. Christianity was growing fast, giving hope to poor and hurting people, but it also taught that kingdoms on earth don't last forever and that real loyalty belongs to God in heaven, not to Rome. Even the emperors changed. Early ones at least pretended to serve the people. But by the late 200s, many acted like Eastern kings, dressing fancy, making people bow, and saying they were gods. This was the broken empire Diocletian got, an empire that had forgotten how to be Roman, an army more outside than Roman, money falling apart. People who had traded their proud citizenship for free bread and games. Something had to change fast. The empire was too giant and too complicated for one man to run. Enemies were always pushing at the borders, and those enemies were being pushed by even scarier groups farther away. The army was stretched thin and not very trustworthy. The treasury was empty. Diocletian's answer seemed super smart and simple: split the empire into parts, each run by its own good emperor who could fix his own area's problems fast. It made sense. It was a clear fix for a huge mess, but making sense isn't always wise. Sometimes trying to fix something breaks the most important part. Sometimes when you try so hard to save something, you accidentally destroy what made it special in the first place. To understand why Diocletian made this huge choice, you have to imagine trying to run a country that stretched from cold, rainy England all the way to hot Egypt, from the beaches of Portugal to rivers in the Middle East. Now imagine doing that with only horses and ships, no phones, no planes, no fast mail. A letter from Rome to the German border took at least a month if the weather was good and the roads safe. A letter to the east could take 2 months or more. By the time the emperor heard about a problem, everything had usually changed. By the time his orders got there, they were often useless or even made things worse. This slow news created a big problem. Local generals had to make fast choices without waiting for the boss, but they weren't allowed to make big choices on their own. Everyone was stuck. The fighting side was even worse. Rome had about 5,600 miles of borders to guard, and the enemies were getting smarter and stronger. The old plan, thin walls plus fast-moving backup armies, was falling apart because enemies attacked in big, planned groups. The Goths built boats and raided seaside towns. The Alemanni pushed hard at the Rhine River with new weapons. The Persian Empire came back strong and fought Rome with armies just as good as Roman ones. But the most dangerous enemies weren't outside, they were Romans fighting Romans. The 200s were full of civil wars as generals fought each other to be emperor. These wars used up soldiers and money that should have protected the borders, and they let outside enemies walk right in. The numbers were brutal. Rome needed around 400,000 soldiers to guard everything well, but sickness, wars, and money trouble meant fewer babies and fewer people overall. Fewer people meant fewer soldiers, which meant more hired outsiders, which meant weaker protection, which meant more attacks, which meant even fewer people. It was a deadly loop with no way out. Money was just as bad. The army ate up about 75% of all the money the empire had. Add government workers, city walls, roads, and free food for Rome, and they were spending way more than they could ever collect. Emperors tried everything. They made bad coins, which made prices explode. They raised taxes, which made more people poor and gave even less money back. They took things from rich people, which scared everyone and stopped new ideas. Nothing worked. The empire had built its own trap. It was too big to run, but they couldn't let any part go because every part felt important. Every fix hurt something else. Success made it worse. Roman laws and ways had spread everywhere, making one big happy civilization. But because it worked so well, no one wanted to give up even one little piece. How could Rome leave Britain after making it Roman for 300 years? How could they give up rich, soldier-filled Gaul? How could they walk away from the Danube and leave Roman families to enemy tribes? Every place had people who said, "We matter." Every border seemed super important. There was no clear place to make the empire smaller and safer. Third-century emperors tried different plans. Some cared only about the East and let the West fight alone. Some protected Italy and the West and ignored the East. A few tried to guard everything with pure stubbornness and desperate tricks. None lasted long. The empire was just too huge for one person to control. Problems grew faster than fixes. The capital was losing control, and faraway places were turning into their own little kingdoms. By the time Diocletian took over in 284, Rome had suffered 50 years of almost constant disaster. Money was gone, the army was broken, borders were falling. Everyone had stopped believing Rome could never lose. Something huge had to change. The old one-boss system had failed. Rome needed a brand new plan to survive. Diocletian's idea sounded perfect. If one man can't run it, let 4 good men share the job. Each emperor looks after his own part, fixes problems fast, and still works together for the same big goals. In the short term, it worked amazingly. Diocletian's tetrarchy, his 4-emperor team, brought calm for the first time in years. Borders were safe again. Money got better. The army got stronger and happier. His new rules made government work smoother across the giant land. But there was a hidden price, one that wouldn't show up for years. By splitting the empire to save it, Diocletian broke the one thing that made Rome special, being one single team. For over 1,000 years, Rome was more than a city or a country. It was one huge idea, everyone under one law, one leader, one future. People from England to Egypt, Spain to Syria, all felt like family. They were citizens of the same forever city, serving the same leader, part of the same mission to bring order to the world. Diocletian's split broke that feeling. Suddenly there were 2 Romes, 2 bosses, 2 centers. East and West started growing apart, different ways, different wishes, different futures. What used to be one big family started turning into 2 different ones. The split was supposed to be just for work, not forever. The empire was still one big team in name, but names and real life are different. Real life meant the 2 sides started fighting over the best soldiers, the most money, the most respect. Each side built its own palace, its own workers, its own dreams. Money got messed up too. For hundreds of years, the whole empire used the same roads, the same money, the same rules. Now different parts had different rules, different coins, different bosses. Buying and selling across long distances got harder and scarier. The army split too. Soldiers from the east and west grew apart. They started seeing each other as rivals instead of teammates. When civil wars started, and they always did, Roman soldiers killed other Roman soldiers, making the whole empire weaker while enemies got stronger. The biggest change was in people's hearts. Roman culture had always mixed the best ideas from everywhere: Greek thinking, Egyptian gods, German fighting tricks, Persian organizing, all blended into one amazing Roman way. But the split stopped the blending. The East got more Greek. The West stayed more Latin. One big mixed family turned into 2 separate ones. Religion split too. Christianity was growing everywhere, but East and West started praying differently, believing slightly different things, and treating emperors differently. That would later cause huge fights between churches. Worst of all, people started thinking I'm an Eastern Roman or I'm a Western Roman instead of just I'm Roman. That change made it easier later to give up half the empire to save the other half. It also let clever enemy leaders play the 2 sides against each other, making deals with one to hurt the other. Diocletian himself seemed to know some of the danger. In 305, he did something no emperor had ever done. He retired on purpose, hoping everyone would copy him and hand over power peacefully. But retiring just made things fall apart faster. His helpers fought new civil wars for almost 20 years. When Constantine finally put the empire back together in 324, the damage was already done. Everyone was used to the idea that the empire could be split. Constantine built a brand new capital city, Constantinople, to be a new Rome for the East. But that just made the split official. Now there were 2 capital cities. The final split happened in 395 when Emperor Theodosius died and gave the East to one son and the West to the other. It was supposed to be temporary, but it never went back. After that, there were two separate Roman empires, each going its own way. The Eastern Empire, later called the Byzantine Empire, lived another 1,000 years, but the Western Empire, the Rome of Caesar, Augustus, Cicero, and Virgil, fell apart in less than 100 years. The sad joke is that Diocletian split Rome to save it, and in a way he did. The East survived. But the East survived by slowly stopping being truly Roman and becoming a Greek kingdom that still used the name Roman. The West died because of the very split that was supposed to save it, cut off from Eastern money and help, worn out by its own fights, too weak to guard its giant borders. Diocletian's mistake wasn't mean or dumb. It came from clear thinking and real love for Rome. But it was still a deadly mistake because it killed the one-team feeling that had always been Rome's greatest power. By making the empire easier to run, he made it less Roman. By fixing today's problems, he caused tomorrow's disaster. By trying to save Rome, he ended up killing it. The lesson hurts. Sometimes the smartest fix is the most dangerous. Sometimes trying to solve one problem right now makes way bigger problems later. Diocletian never knew what his choice would cause. He was facing a huge crisis. His plan worked for a while, but the long-term results were terrible. And they teach us that even people with the best hearts can cause the worst endings. The Roman Empire didn't fall because enemies beat it, or money ran out, or soldiers lost battles. It fell because it stopped feeling Roman. And it stopped feeling Roman because of one choice made by a good emperor who only wanted to save the empire he loved. That's the real sadness of Rome's story. It didn't have to end that way. It wasn't because of things Romans couldn't control. It wasn't because people got lazy or bad. It was one huge mistake made by a man trying to do the right thing. The Roman legions used to scare the whole world. They were perfectly trained, totally loyal, and won an empire from England to the Middle East. But by the 300s and 400s, something big had changed. The army that once showed Roman pride had become Rome's biggest weakness. It started because Rome needed more soldiers than its own people could give. The fix seemed easy: hire fighters from outside the empire, German tribes, Sarmatian horse soldiers, Gothic warriors. They became official allies called foederati who fought for Rome for money, land, and the promise of citizenship. At first it worked fine. These fighters were tough and brought new tricks that helped win battles. Rome had always been good at using the best ideas from the people it beat, but there was a huge difference this time. In the old days when Rome took over a place, it slowly turned the people into real Romans, teaching them laws, language, schools, and duty. After a few generations, they felt 100% Roman. The new hired groups never really became Roman. They kept their own tribes, customs, and loyalties. They wore Roman uniforms but stayed who they were inside, so Rome ended up with an army that looked Roman but felt barbarian. These soldiers didn't grow up loving Rome. They fought because they got paid. Their real hearts stayed with their own people. The split of the empire made it worse. East and West armies grew apart and started seeing each other as almost enemies. A Gothic soldier in the West felt closer to Goths in the East than to the Roman families he was supposed to protect. The old Roman army ways, strict training, giving up everything for Rome, slowly disappeared. The new fighters brought their own rules: loyalty to a war boss, fighting for personal fame and treasure. Roman armies used to move like one perfect machine. Now they were wilder, harder to control, better at one-on-one fights but worse at big, smart plans. Little by little, the army stopped being Roman. It turned into a bunch of tribal groups held together by money. Even the officers changed. In the old days, rich Roman men became generals because it was their duty and a way to help the country. Later, full-time soldiers, and many were from outside tribes, took over the top jobs. Men like Stilicho, a vandal who basically ran the West for years, or Ricimer, a Suevi who picked and removed emperors like toys. They were good at war and organizing, but they were Roman in their hearts, so the army and the regular people grew far apart. Soldiers and civilians lived in different worlds, spoke different languages, prayed to different gods, wanted different things. The army became its own separate country inside Rome. When big attacks came, this caused disaster. In 406, a huge group of tribes crossed the frozen Rhine River into France. Instead of everyone fighting together, the hired soldiers started thinking, what's best for me and my people? Some stayed loyal for a while, some joined the invaders, Some tried to make their own little kingdoms. The army that should have been Rome's shield became part of the attack. When Alaric and his Visigoths sacked Rome in 410, it was extra sad because Alaric had been a Roman general for years. He knew everything about Rome and used it against the city. The same thing kept happening all through the 400s. Leaders who learned to fight in the Roman army later used those skills to build their own countries on Roman land. The very last Western emperor was removed in 476 by Odoacer, a German leader who had been a Roman officer. He didn't conquer Rome from the outside, he just took over from the inside. The Eastern Empire lasted longer because it was smarter at keeping control of hired soldiers and playing tribes against each other, and because it kept stronger non-army government. But even there, depending on outsiders caused big problems later. The army changing from Roman citizens to paid outsiders was the clearest sign Rome was dying. The thing that once carried Roman pride became the tool that ended Rome. The funny sad part is it happened because Rome needed soldiers, and outsiders were ready and good at fighting. By fixing the short-term problem, Rome created a huge long-term disaster, an army that was Roman anymore. The lesson is simple. Groups like armies aren't just buildings and rules. They carry feelings, ways of life, and who we are. Change the people, and you change everything. When Rome stopped wanting its own citizens to fight and hired outsiders instead, it lost the one thing that could truly protect Roman life. It was another result of Diocletian's big split. Once the empire wasn't one team anymore, people stopped feeling they had to fight for it. In the end, Rome didn't lose to outsiders. The outsiders became the army. And when that happened, Roman and barbarian didn't mean different things anymore. Rome lived on in name, but the real Rome was already gone. For centuries, the word barbarian meant wild, dangerous people who lived outside the safe, civilized Roman world, people who didn't speak Latin or Greek and didn't know Roman laws or ways. But by the late 300s, that simple line was disappearing. Barbarians weren't outside anymore. They were inside, fighting in Roman armies, running Roman lands, and making big decisions. The change from enemies to friends to bosses is one of the biggest turnarounds in history. It didn't happen fast. For years, tribes had been pushing against Roman borders, not because they had a plan to destroy Rome, but because scary groups farther east were pushing them west. The Huns, super-fast horse warriors from far away in Asia, started moving and pushed everyone in front of them. The Huns didn't want to live in Roman houses. They wanted to control people and make them pay money and give soldiers. The pressure from the Huns forced many tribes to ask Rome for help and a safe place inside the borders. These weren't the wild savages from old Roman stories. Many had known Romans for years. They used Roman weapons, copied Roman fighting ways, and had their own kings and rules. For example, the Visigoths had been friends and neighbors of Rome for a long time before they asked to move in 376. They wanted to be safe and maybe become Roman, but Rome had forgotten its old welcoming ways. Instead of slowly turning the Visigoths into real Romans, government workers treated them badly, gave them bad land, didn't bring enough food, and cheated them. Everyone could guess what happened next. The Visigoths got mad and fought back. In 378, at the Battle of Adrianople, they destroyed a Roman army and killed the Emperor Valens. It was one of the worst days ever for Rome and the start of losing the Balkans forever. Even after that huge loss, Rome didn't learn the right lesson. Instead of fixing how it treated newcomers, it kept seeing them as problems to push around instead of future Romans. That mistake turned people who wanted to join Rome into enemies who never forgot. The split empire made everything messier. East and West emperors sometimes helped the same tribes, sometimes used them against each other. Smart tribal leaders learned to make deals with both sides, getting money and land while staying free. Alaric and his Visigoths were experts at this. They fought for the East against the West, then switched when they got a better offer. They asked for money, land, and official jobs, but kept their freedom to attack cities if they didn't get what they wanted. Alaric's sack of Rome in 410 was the final big moment of this long story. It wasn't a total barbarian conquest. Here is the script rewritten in simple and clear English so that a fifth-grade student can easily understand it. Every line matches the original exactly in length, sequence, and information. I only fixed grammar, spelling, punctuation, and made the words easier while keeping the same tone, style, and format. It was a labor dispute that got out of hand. Alaric had served Rome faithfully for years. But when the empire did not keep its promises to him, he decided to take his payment by force. The shock of Rome being robbed was huge. For 800 years, no foreign enemy had entered the Eternal City. Romans had believed that their capital was protected by the gods themselves. When Alaric and his Visigoths marched through the streets of Rome, robbing palaces and churches, that belief was broken forever. But the robbing of Rome was just the beginning. In 455, the Vandals robbed the city again. In 472, Reimer's Germanic troops took control of it. By the end of the 5th century, Rome had been robbed so many times that it had lost its special meaning. The Eternal City had become just another prize to be fought over by barbarian warlords. The same thing happened all over the Western Empire. In Gaul, the Franks built a kingdom that would later become France. In Spain, the Visigoths created a land that lasted for 3 centuries. In North Africa, the Vandals built a sea empire that ruled the Western Mediterranean. These were not short takeovers, they were lasting changes. The barbarian kingdoms that grew from the pieces of the Western Empire were not trying to bring back Roman rule. They were making something new, something that mixed barbarian ways of ruling with Roman ways of running things. The change was often surprisingly peaceful. Many Roman rich people found that they could keep their money and high place by working with barbarian rulers. Many barbarian leaders found that they could rule better by using Roman ways of doing government work. The result was a slow mixing of Roman and barbarian ways that built the base of medieval European civilization. But this mixing came with a price, the end of Roman togetherness. What had once been one big empire became many fighting kingdoms, each with its own laws, customs, and wants. The big civilization that Rome had made was replaced by many local cultures that shared only some old Roman things. The Eastern Empire lived through this change, but only by becoming something different. The Byzantine Empire that grew from the eastern lands was Greek instead of Latin, Orthodox instead of Catholic, ruled by one strong leader instead of sharing power. It kept many Roman ways, but it was no longer really Roman. The barbarian attacks were not the reason Rome fell. They were the result of Rome's own inside problems. The empire fell because it had lost the power to welcome new people, to make its people feel loyal, to keep the togetherness that had been its greatest strength. The barbarians did not destroy Roman ways of life. They took them over. But they took them over in pieces, and they did not have the dream or the power to put those pieces back together. The result was the end of the ancient world and the beginning of the medieval time, a time when Europe would be split among fighting kingdoms instead of joined under one empire. The funny part is that many of the barbarian leaders who took Roman land really liked Roman ways of life. They wanted to be Romans, or at least to rule Romans. But the empire's splitting and inside fights made it impossible for them to reach this dream in a peaceful way. If Rome had stayed together, if it had kept the welcoming power that had once been its greatest strength, the barbarian attacks might have been just another part of the long story of Rome growing bigger. Instead, they became the last part in the story of Rome going down. The barbarians at the gates were not Rome's enemies, they were Rome's left behind children, people who had been touched by Roman ways of life but never fully welcomed by it. When they finally broke through the gates, they were not destroying Rome. They were taking what they thought was theirs, but by then, there was no longer a real Rome to take. Only the broken pieces of what had once been the greatest empire in human history. The year was 410 of the Common Era. For over 8 centuries, Rome had stood safe, protected by its armies, its walls, and the belief that the gods themselves watched over the Eternal City. No foreign enemy had broken through its walls since the Gauls under Brennus had robbed it in 390 before the Common Era. Rome was not just a city, it was a symbol, an idea, the beating heart of the whole world of its time. But on August 24, 410, that symbol was broken forever. Alaric, king of the Visigoths, led his warriors through the gates of Rome and let the Eternal City be robbed for 3 days in a planned way. The shock was terrible not just for Romans, but for the whole known world. To understand how big this disaster was, we need to know what Rome meant to the people of the 4th and 5th centuries. This was not just the main city of an empire, it was the center of the world, the place where heaven and earth met, the city that the gods had picked to rule the world. Rome's buildings themselves shouted that it would last forever. the Roman Forum, where senators had argued about the future of countries for hundreds of years. The Circus Maximus, where 250,000 people could watch chariot races. The Colosseum, where gladiators had fought and died for the fun of the crowds. The Pantheon, where all the gods of the empire were worshipped together. These were not just buildings. They were proof that Rome would never end, strong signs that Rome would last forever. The city had almost 1 million people and was the biggest city in the Western world. Its riches, gained from hundreds of years of winning wars and taxes, were famous. But by 410, Rome's greatness was mostly in the past. The emperors had long ago moved their main cities to safer places. Milan, Ravenna, Constantinople. The number of people living there had dropped a lot as jobs moved away. Many of the great buildings were falling apart. Still, Rome kept its special meaning. It was still the eternal city, still the heart of the empire, still the place where the gods lived among people. The idea that barbarians could really walk into Rome, could steal its treasures, and shame its people was something no one could imagine. Alaric's road to Rome had been long and hard to follow. He was a Visigoth, one of the Germanic peoples who had been pushed west by the Huns, but he was also a Roman because he had served in the Roman army and had a Roman army rank. He understood Roman leaders, Roman weak spots, and Roman fears. For years, Alaric had played a tricky game, sometimes helping Rome, sometimes fighting Rome, always working for his own people's good. He had asked for land for his followers, an official place for his power, and regular money from the Roman treasury. When these wishes were given, he was a loyal helper. When they were ignored, he became a dangerous enemy. The direct reason for Alaric's march on Rome was a fight over money. The Western Empire, having money troubles and leader fights, had not kept its promises to the Visigothic king. Alaric had tried talking with leaders, and making threats. When nothing else worked, he decided to take his money by force. The blocking of Rome was a perfect example of mind tricks in war. Alaric did not attack the city's walls. He simply closed it off and waited. Rome's huge number of people needed tons of food, most of which came from North Africa and Sicily. When Alaric stopped these food ships, the city began to go hungry. The Roman Senate, that old group that had once ruled the whole Mediterranean world, had to beg a barbarian king for their city to live. They offered money, prisoners, even promises to help later. But Alaric's wishes kept growing. The last talks were done by Pope Innocent I, a sign of how much the Christian Church had taken the place of old Roman groups as the real power in the city. But even help from the Pope could not stop the disaster that was coming. On August 24th, the gates of Rome were opened. Some stories say slaves or Gothic friends inside the city opened them. Others say Rome's defenders were too few and too scared. The way it happened does not matter. What matters is that the thing no one thought could happen did happen. Alaric's Visigoths poured into the eternal city like a flood, but this was not the crazy destroying that Roman stories always said barbarians did. Alaric was a Christian, and he had given strict rules that churches must be left alone, and people were not to be hurt unless needed. The robbing was planned and controlled. The Visigoths went after the homes of the rich, the temples of the old gods, and the public buildings that held the treasures of hundreds of years. They filled wagons with gold, silver, jewels, and beautiful art. They took important people prisoner, including Galla Placidia, the emperor's sister, but they did not burn the city or kill everyone. This was a business deal, not killing everyone. Alaric wanted to show his power and get what he was owed, not to wipe out Roman ways of life completely. The 3 days of robbing were carefully watched. When they were done, Alaric led his people out of Rome, taking their stolen things and their prisoners with them. The city was left standing, but shamed, missing its treasures, but still alive. The real harm right away was not too bad. Rome would get back from the lost things within a generation, but the hurt to people's feelings could never be fixed. The story that Rome could never be beaten had been broken. The eternal city had been shown to be as weak as any other. The news of Rome being robbed spread through the empire like wildfire. In faraway lands, Roman people cried in the streets. In barbarian lands, warriors got their swords ready and began to dream of their own marches on Roman cities. The power in the Mediterranean world had changed forever. St. Jerome, writing from his monastery in Bethlehem, caught the feeling of the time. The city which had taken the whole world was itself taken. St. Augustine began writing his great book, The City of God, partly to answer people who blamed Christianity for Rome's fall, but maybe the clearest answer came from the Emperor Honorius, who was safe. In his capital at Ravenna, when told that Rome had fallen, he got scared, thinking that his favorite rooster, also named Rome, had died. When told the bird was safe, he calmed down. The story may not be true, but it perfectly shows how far away the imperial leaders were from what was really happening in the empire. Alaric himself did not live long to enjoy his win. He died later that same year, maybe from sickness, while planning to attack North Africa. His followers buried him in a riverbed along with much of the treasure he had taken from Rome, then moved the river back to hide the grave forever. But Alaric's death did not fix the harm he had done. Rome had been robbed, and the world had seen it happen. The example had been set. Other barbarian leaders would copy Alaric, and Rome would be robbed again and again in the years that followed. The robbing of 410 was not the end of Rome, but it was the beginning of the end. It was the moment when the eternal city's forever nature was shown to be a story. Rome was not protected by the gods. It was not meant to rule forever. It was just another city, able to be hurt by the same things that had destroyed many other cities. Throughout history, the hurt to people's feelings from this truth cannot be told too strongly. For over 1,000 years, Romans had believed in their own future, their own forever life, their own God-given job to rule the world. When that belief was broken, something important died in the Roman heart. The empire would go on for another 66 years in the west, another 1,000 years in the east, but it would never again be the sure, growing, world-winning power that it had once been. The robbing of Rome marked the end of the ancient world and the beginning of something new, something smaller, something broken into pieces. In trying to save the empire by splitting it, Diocletian had made it open to exactly this kind of disaster. A united Rome might have been able to stop Alaric's march on the capital, or at least to fight back better, but a split empire, with its strength spread out and its mind split, could not protect even its most special symbols. The eternal city had fallen, and with it the dream of an eternal Rome. What was left was just another group of medieval kingdoms fighting over the pieces of what had once been the greatest empire in human history. His name was Romulus Augustus, and he was perhaps the most strangely named ruler in human history, Romulus after the man who started Rome, Augustulus little Augustus after the first and greatest of the Roman emperors. But this Romulus would not start an empire. He would watch its end. And this Augustus would not bring glory to Rome. He would watch its last shame. The year was 476 of the Common Era. The Western Roman Empire, that mighty giant that had once ruled the Mediterranean world, had been shrunk to a small state centered on Italy. Its lands had been taken by barbarian kingdoms. Its armies were mostly Germanic paid soldiers. Its money box was empty. Its power was laughed at, and its very life depended on the wishes of barbarian warlords. Romulus Augustulus was not even a real emperor in any true way. He was a child, probably no more than 12 years old, put on the throne by his father, Orestes, a man who had once worked for Attila the Hun, who had taken power by a soldier takeover. The boy emperor was a puppet, a pretend leader, a sign of how far the great had fallen, but even puppet emperors need someone to move them, and Orestes found himself facing a hopeless problem. His Germanic troops, led by a leader named Odoacer, were asking for what barbarian soldiers had always asked for: land, money, and respect. They wanted 1/3 of the land in Italy to be given to them as forever homes. Orestes said no. Maybe he still believed in the story of Roman power. Maybe he thought he could find another way. Maybe he simply could not make himself say that Italy itself had become barbarian land. Whatever his reasons, saying no ended his life and that of his son. Odoacer was not a wild barbarian leader like Romans thought. He was a smart political person who understood both Germanic warrior ways and Roman government ways. He had served in the Roman army, had Roman army rank, and learned Roman leader tricks. When he decided to move against Orestes, he did it with careful planning. The takeover was fast and complete. Orestes was caught and killed. His helpers were scattered or killed. Within weeks, Odoacer controlled Italy and held the future of the last Western emperor in his hands. But what to do with Romulus Augustus? The boy had done no wrong except being born into a hopeless place. He was no real danger to anyone. He was in many ways as much a victim as anyone else. Odoacer's answer was smart and important in history. he did not kill the boy emperor as people might have thought. Instead, he officially took him off the throne, gave him a good yearly money gift, and sent him to a nice, quiet life. The message was clear. The Western Roman Empire was finished, but it was ending not with killing, but with a kind of official neatness. More importantly, Odoacer did not take the emperor name for himself. He understood that calling himself emperor would make enemies of the Eastern Empire, other barbarian leaders, and Romans who still believed in the real emperor rule. Instead, he took the name of king of Italy and officially sent the emperor clothes and crown back to Constantinople. This was a clever show of leader skill. By sending the emperor signs to the Eastern emperor, Odoacer was saying that there was still a Roman Empire, just not in the West. He was showing himself not as a taker, but as a real ruler who happened to rule old Roman land for the true emperor in Constantinople. The Eastern Emperor Zeno was in a hard spot. He could not really fight Odoacer's control of Italy, but he also could not officially say the Western Empire was gone. His answer was to give Odoacer the name of High Lord and to say he was the real ruler of Italy while keeping the story that this was only for a short time. And so, with very little noise, the Western Roman Empire came to an end. There were no big battles, no great last fights, no brave speeches about Roman goodness and future. The last emperor was simply given money and life went on. The date usually given for the fall of the Western Roman Empire is September 4th, 476, when Romulus Augustulus was taken off the throne. But this date is not exactly right. The empire had really been dead for many years before Odoacer made it official. The real question is not when Rome fell, but why it fell so quietly with so little fighting, with so little feeling that something really big was ending. The answer is in the change that had been happening for over 100 years. By 476, there were very few people left who thought of themselves as Romans in the old way. The army was barbarian. The government workers were mostly barbarian. Even many of the so-called Roman rich people were from barbarian families. More importantly, the things that had once made Rome Roman had long ago gone away or changed so much they were not the same. The Senate still met, but it was only a shadow of what it used to be. The top jobs still existed, but they were just empty names. The citizenship that had once been the pride of the empire had been given to everyone and so meant nothing. The splitting of the empire had made this loss of Roman feeling faster. When there were two emperors, two main cities, two governments, the idea of one Roman family became weaker and weaker. People began to think of themselves as Easterners or Westerners, as people of this emperor or that emperor, instead of as Romans. The barbarian kingdoms that had grown in the old Western lands gave another way of ruling that was often better than the broken empire way. The Visigothic kingdom in Spain, the Frankish kingdom in Gaul, the Vandal kingdom in North Africa all gave safety, fair rules, and good life to their people without the heavy taxes and slow government that had marked the late empire. By 476, many people in the old Western lands were probably better off under barbarian kings than they had been under Roman rule. The barbarian kings were often closer than faraway emperors, quicker to help local needs, more ready to change their rules for local places. The end of the Western Empire was not a disaster for most of its old people. It was simply change of bosses, a saying out loud of what had already become true. The Roman Empire in the West had been dead for many years. Odoacer simply buried the body. But what about Romulus Augustulus himself? What happened to the last emperor of the West? The history books are not clear. We know that Odoacer gave him a yearly money gift of 6,000 gold pieces and let him live in a nice house in Campania. After that, he disappears from history. Some stories say that he lived quietly as a normal person, maybe becoming a monk when he was older. Others say he may have helped later tries to bring back emperor rule in Italy, but the truth is that we simply do not know. The last emperor of the West disappeared into quiet, which is maybe right for a man who had been emperor only in name. The strange thing about Romulus Augustulus is big. He carried the names of Rome's starter and its greatest emperor, but he watched Rome's end. He was called Augustus, but he had no real power. He was supposed to be the next in line from Caesar and Trajan and Marcus Aurelius, but he was just a child caught in things far too big for him to control or understand. In many ways, Romulus Augustus was the perfect picture of what the Western Empire had become, an empty shell, a name with no meaning, a memory of past greatness that had no link to the real world now. His being taken off the throne was not the reason Rome fell, but only the official saying of what had already happened. The Eastern Empire would keep calling itself Roman for another 1,000 years, but the Rome of Caesar and Augustus, of Cicero and Virgil, of the soldiers and the eagles and the dream of one big empire, died. With Romulus Augustus, what lived on was something different, something that kept some Roman shapes and ways, but had lost the Roman heart. The last emperor of the West was not a hero or a bad man. He was simply the last person in a sad story that had been going on for over 100 years. His story reminds us that history is not always made by great people making great choices. Sometimes it is made by normal people caught in things bigger than them, doing their best to live in a world that no longer makes sense. Romulus Augustus was the last emperor, but he was not the last Roman. That name belongs to all of us who still remember what Rome was supposed to stand for. The idea that people can make order out of wildness, fairness out of fighting, civilization out of wild ways. As long as that idea lives, something of Rome lives with it, but the empire itself, the fighting and ruling power that had ruled the Mediterranean world for over 500 years was gone forever, and its end can be traced back to one choice made with the best plans by a man who thought he was saving Rome when he was really hurting it. The Western Roman Empire officially ended in 476, but its fall was not one thing that happened. It was a long, slow breaking that had been going on for over 200 years, and in many ways that breaking is still going on today as we fight with the same big questions that broke Rome. How do you keep everyone together when people are so different? How do you balance strong center rules with local freedom? How do you keep civilization safe when things inside are falling apart and outside people are pushing? The time right after Rome's fall was not the dark time many people think. Life went on. The barbarian kingdoms that took Rome's place often ruled better than the empire had in its last years. Trade kept going, cities stayed alive, and Roman law and ways lived on in changed forms. But something important had been lost: the idea of one big civilization under one ruler. The Mediterranean world, which had been joined under Roman rule for over 500 years, broke into fighting kingdoms, each with its own laws, customs, and wants. The dream of a single human family ruled by reason and fairness was replaced by the truth of tribe loyalties and local power. The Eastern Empire, which we now call the Byzantine Empire, lived for another 1,000 years, but it lived by giving up most of what had made Rome Roman. It became Greek instead of Latin, Orthodox instead of Catholic, ruled by one strong king instead of sharing power. It kept Roman law and Roman government ways, but it lost the Roman heart of growing, welcoming, and everyone being a citizen. The Byzantine Empire was a great thing in its own way, but it was not Rome in any real way. It was a Greek empire that happened to call itself Roman, a Middle Ages country that kept some old shapes while giving up old dreams. In the West, the barbarian kingdoms that grew from the broken empire slowly turned into the Middle Ages European countries we know from history. The Frankish kingdom became France. The Visigothic kingdom became Spain. The Anglo-Saxon kingdoms became England. Each kept some Roman things while growing its own special ways. But none of these new countries could match the size and dreams of the Roman Empire at its best. They were local powers, not world empires. They ruled land, not big ideas. They ruled people, not citizens. The Holy Roman Empire, started by Charlemagne in 800, was a try to bring back Roman big dreams, but it was Roman only in name, a loose group of German lands that never had the togetherness or strength of the real empire. It lasted for over 1,000 years, but it was always more a wish than a real thing. The real follower of Roman ways of life was not any country, but the Catholic Church. The Church kept Roman law, Roman government ways, and Roman big dreams. It kept a single power ruling many different people across huge lands. It helped a common way of life and a common set of beliefs. In many ways, the Middle Ages Church was more Roman than any of the countries that said they followed Rome. But the Church's big dream was about souls instead of land. It could join hearts but not countries. It could give good teaching but not strong ruling. The Middle Ages world stayed split in power, a group of fighting kingdoms instead of one big empire. The Renaissance brought a new love for Roman ways of life, but it was a book love instead of a real one. Renaissance thinkers studied Roman books, art, and ideas, but they did not try hard to bring back Roman ruling ways. The new countries that grew from the Middle Ages were built on same language and same people ideas instead of Roman big dreams. The modern world has seen many tries to make something like the Roman Empire again, Napoleon's Empire, Hitler's Third Reich, the Soviet Union, the European Union. All have been compared to Rome, and all have failed to match Rome's mix of togetherness, safety, and long life. The United States, with its shared power government, its joined but separate states, and its big dreams, is maybe the closest modern match to the Roman Republic. But America faces many of the same problems that broke Rome: the fight between strong center power and local freedom, the hard job of keeping good behavior in a rich country, the challenge of welcoming many different people into one common way of life. The matches are clear and worrying. Like Rome, America has grown from a small shared power country into a world power. Like Rome, it faces pressure from people at its borders who want to share in its good life. Like Rome, it fights with the damage that comes with riches and power. Like Rome, it is tempted to fix its problems by splitting instead of staying together. The lesson of Rome's fall is not that empires always fall, though they do, but that they fall for clear reasons we can name. Rome fell because it gave up the ideas that had made it great. It fell because it picked short-time fixes over long-time safety. It fell because it lost belief in its own job and beliefs. Most importantly, Rome fell because it split itself. Diocletian's choice to split the empire was smart, useful, and needed for his time. But it was also deadly because it broke the togetherness that was Rome's greatest strength. The splitting of the empire made two fighting centers of power where there had been one. It helped local feelings grow stronger than empire feelings. It made it easier for barbarian people to play east against west. It turned one way of life into two different ways. The change was slow and at first worked well. The four-leader plan brought safety to the empire for the first time in years. The splitting let each half of the empire work on its own problems without faraway troubles. For a while, it looked like Diocletian had found the perfect answer to ruling a huge empire. But the long-time results were terrible. The splitting made the breaking official. It made forever what was supposed to be for a short time. It set the example for more splitting. More breaking, more weakening of empire power. By the 5th century, the Western Empire was so weak that it could not protect itself from barbarian attacks. By the 6th century, it had stopped being a real country. The Eastern Empire lived longer, but only by becoming something totally different from what Rome had first been. The sad part of Rome's fall is that it could have been stopped. The empire did not fall because of outside enemies or storms or things that had to happen. It fell because of people. Choices, people mistakes, people failing to dream and to want. If Diocletian had found a way to fix the empire without splitting it, if later emperors had kept Roman togetherness while changing for new times, if the Roman people had kept their good behavior and their care for everyone's good, the empire might have lived and changed instead of broken and fallen apart. But history does not give second tries. The choices were made, the results came, and the Roman Empire fell. What is left is the memory of what was lost, and the warning of what can happen when great ways of life give up the ideas that made them great. The fall of Rome is not just old history. It is a continuing story. Forever reminder of how easily great human things can break and the importance of the choices we make. Every group of people faces the same big questions that faced Diocletian. How do we balance togetherness and difference? How do we keep strong center power while letting local places be free? How do we keep what is good from the past while changing for the problems of today? The answers we give to these questions will decide whether our own way of life lives and grows or follows Rome into the trash of history. The choice, as always, is ours. But the story of Rome reminds us that even the strongest empires can fall, and that the biggest danger often comes not from outside enemies, but from our own inside splitting and failures of dreaming. Rome fell because it stopped being Roman. It stopped believing in its own job, its own beliefs, its own future. It chose the easy way of splitting over the hard way of togetherness. It traded its great gift for a little food, and in the end, it lost both. The lesson is clear. Ways of life are not destroyed by their enemies. They are destroyed by their own choices. And the most deadly choice of all is the choice to give up the togetherness that makes a way of life possible in the first place. That was Rome's deadly mistake. It split itself to save itself, and in Doing so, it destroyed itself. The empire that had once seemed forever proved to be as short-lived as any other human thing, but its memory lives on, a reminder of both the greatest heights people can reach and the lowest places they can fall. The Roman Empire is gone, but the Roman question lives. Will we choose togetherness or splitting? Will we keep what makes us great, or will we trade it away for short-time gain? Will we learn from Rome's story, or will we make Rome's mistakes again? The answer is not in the past, but in the future, not in what Rome did, but in what we choose to do. The fall of Rome is not just history. It is a warning, a sign of what waits for any way of life that forgets what made it great in the first place. And so the fall goes on not as one thing, but as a long process, a forever. Reminder that even the strongest empires are only as strong as the togetherness that holds them together. Rome split itself and fell. The question that still worries us is whether we will be smart enough to learn from Rome's deadly mistake, or whether we too will choose splitting over togetherness and suffer the same sure end. The eternal city is gone, but the eternal question lives. And on our answer hangs the future not just of our own way of life, but of ways of life itself. Tonight, we've walked through one of history's greatest sad stories, the fall of an empire that thought it could never die. We've seen how Rome grew from small beginnings to rule the world, how it changed from shared power to one-man rule, how it grew rich on its own winning, and how it finally destroyed itself through one deadly choice. Diocletian's splitting of the empire seemed like wisdom at the time. It was smart, useful, needed, but it was also the beginning of the end because it broke the very thing that made Rome Roman, its togetherness. The lesson rings through the hundreds of years. Sometimes the cure is worse than the sickness. Sometimes our answers become our problems. Sometimes in trying to save what we love, we end up destroying it. Rome fell not because it was weak, but because it forgot what made it strong. Not because of its enemies, but because of its own choices. Not because it had to, but because it chose to. And that choice, the choice between togetherness and splitting, between strength and easy ways, between the hard road and the easy road, is one that every way of life must make. Rome made the wrong choice. The question that still worries us is, what choice will we make? Thank you for coming with me on this trip through the dark parts of history. Until next time, remember, empires grow and fall, but the lessons they leave are forever. And the greatest lesson of all is this: togetherness is strength, splitting is death. And the choice between them is always ours to make. But before we close this story of Rome's sad end, we must ask ourselves the hardest question of all. Are we making the same mistakes today? Look around you. Look at the world we've built, the way of life we've been given, the togetherness we've thought would always be there. Do you see the breaks? Do you hear the sounds of Rome's last hundreds of years in our own time? We live in a time of more good things than ever, just as Rome did in the 2nd century. We have tools that would seem like magic to old eyes, riches that would make Caesar cry with jealousy, power that reaches all over the world. But we also have something else that Rome had in its last days: the dangerous thought that our winning makes us unable to be beaten. Like Rome, we face pressure at our borders. Not barbarian tribes, but big moves of people, money troubles, and way of life changes that test our power to stay one people. Like Rome, we fight with the question of how to welcome new people, new ideas, new ways of living into our old ways. Like Rome, we are tempted by the easy answer of splitting. When problems get too big, when togetherness gets too hard, when the center cannot hold, the normal human answer is to break things into smaller, easier pieces. It makes sense. It is useful. It is exactly what Diocletian thought when he split the empire, but making sense is not always being wise. And the answer that makes the most sense can sometimes be the most dangerous one. Think about our own splitting, not just in leaders, but in ways of life, money, age groups. Think about how we've put ourselves into separate groups, separate news worlds, separate truths. Think about how we've let our differences become more important than our shared things, our group loyalties to beat our shared human feelings. This is how empires die, not with a loud noise, but with a quiet sound, not by being taken, but by breaking apart. Not because they're broken from outside, but because they break themselves from inside. Rome's soldiers didn't disappear in one day. They slowly became less Roman and more barbarian until no one could tell the difference. Rome's people didn't suddenly stop being Roman. They slowly stopped caring about being Roman until being a citizen became just another government word. Rome's togetherness didn't break in 1 second. It wore away slowly, without anyone noticing, until one day people woke up and saw that the empire they thought they had no longer existed. Change was so slow that most Romans didn't even see it happening. They went about their daily lives, paid their taxes, watched their games, and thought that Rome would always be there. They couldn't imagine a world without the empire because the empire was all they had ever known. But empires, like all things people make, are more easily broken than they look. They do not depend on stone and metal, but on something much softer, the shared belief that they should be there. When that belief dies, the empire dies with it, no matter how strong its armies or how big its lands. This is the real lesson of Rome's fall, the one that should keep us awake at night. Ways of life don't break because they have to, they break because they choose to. They break because the people who make them stop believing in them, stop working for them, stop giving for them. They break because togetherness becomes too hard and splitting seems too easy, because the good of everyone becomes less important than the good of one person. Because the far future becomes less important than quick winning. They break because people forget that a way of life is not a natural thing but a made one, not something given but a gift, not a right but a job. Rome forgot this. In its last hundreds of years, Romans stopped thinking of themselves as Romans first and something else second. They became Christians or old believers, Easterners or Westerners, rich or poor, citizens or barbarians. They lost the big feeling that had once made them rulers of the world. The question that worries us is whether we're making the same mistake. Are we still Americans or Europeans or people of the world? Or have we become something smaller, something more group-like, something that puts our differences before our shared things? Are we still ready to stand for the ideas that built our way of life? Freedom, fairness, justice, the rule of law, the worth of each person? Or have we decided that these ideas are too costly, too hard, too much trouble for the modern world? Are we still ready to give for the good of everyone, to work together even with our differences, to keep the togetherness that makes a way of life possible? Or have we chosen the easier road of splitting, breaking, and group loyalty? The choice is ours, just as it was Rome's. But we have something that Rome didn't have. We know how the story ends. We've seen what happens when great ways of life choose splitting over togetherness, when they trade their great gift for short-time winning, when they forget what made them great in the first place. We know that empires can fall. We know that ways of life can die. We know that even the greatest human things can turn to dust if the people who made them stop believing in them. But we also know something else. It doesn't have to happen. The fall is not something that must come. The choice is still ours to make. We can choose togetherness over splitting. We can choose the good of everyone over the good of one. We can choose to remember what makes us great instead of forgetting it for quick winning. We can choose to learn from Rome's deadly mistake instead of doing it again, but only if we act now while there's still time, only if we see the danger before it's too late, only if we remember that ways of life are not destroyed by their enemies but by their own choices. The barbarians are not at the gates. They're in our hearts, in our minds, in our readiness to choose the easy road over the right road, splitting over togetherness, group loyalty over shared human feelings. The empire is not falling to outside attack. It's falling to inside rot, to the slow wearing away of the beliefs and values that once made us strong. The eternal city is not being robbed by barbarian armies. It's being left behind by its own people who have forgotten why it was worth protecting in the first place. But it's not too late, it's never too late. As long as there are people ready to remember, ready to choose, ready to give for something bigger than themselves. Rome fell because Romans stopped being Roman. We don't have to make the same mistake. We can choose to stay who we are, to keep what makes us great, to hold the togetherness that makes a way of life possible. The choice is ours. The time is now. The question is whether we have the wisdom to learn from history or the foolishness to do it again. Rome's fall was not something that had to happen. Neither is ours. But only if we choose togetherness over splitting, strength over easy ways, the hard road over the easy road. Only if we remember that empires grow and fall, but the choices that decide their future are forever. Only if we choose to be worthy of the way of life we've been given instead of the group that let it die. The Roman Empire is gone, but the Roman question lives. What will we choose? The answer will decide not just our future, but the future of human ways of life itself. And on that choice, as on all the great choices of history, hangs the future of the world. The fire burns lower now. The shadows grow longer, and the weight of history rests around us like a blanket. We've walked with emperors and barbarians, watched the rise and fall of the greatest empire the world has ever known, and learned the hardest lesson of all. That even the greatest human things are only as strong as the togetherness that holds them together. Rome thought it was forever. Rome thought it couldn't fall. Rome thought its splitting would save it. Rome was wrong. The question that rings through the hundreds of years, that whispers in the wind through the ruins of the Forum, that worries every way of life that has ever dared to call itself great, is this: will we be wiser than Rome? Will we learn from its deadly mistake? Will we choose togetherness when splitting seems easier, strength when weakness seems safer, the hard road when the easy road calls? Or will we, like Rome, split ourselves to save ourselves, only to find that in doing so, we have destroyed the very thing we wanted to keep? The choice, as always, is ours, but the results, as Rome learned too late, are forever. Thank you for walking this long road through history with me tonight. May we all choose more wisely than the Romans did. May we all remember that togetherness is strength. Splitting is death, and the greatest empires fall not to their enemies, but to their own deadly mistakes. Until we meet again in the dark parts of history, remember the past is the beginning. The future is not written, and the choices we make today will ring through the hundreds of years, just as Rome's choices ring still. Sleep well, dream of togetherness, and may we never forget the cost of splitting. Good night.